Welcome again. Thanks so much. This is the fourth public webinar on monitoring climate resilient WASH that's jointly hosted by the WHO, UNICEF, JMP and GLAAS teams. And today marks an important milestone in our collaborative review process as we launch a public consultation on the emerging shortlist of candidate indicators for global monitoring. So your feedback will help shape the next phase of this initiative. So it's great that you're all coming in, and we really want to hear your thoughts. So this work is being led by, as I mentioned, the JMP and GLAAS teams, supported by a consortium of academic partners from Leeds, Bristol, Oxford and UTS, Sydney, guided by the diverse technical working group that's formed to support this. And together we've reviewed over 600 indicators driven from literature and sector experience feedback and refined them now into a shortlist of 44 promising candidates. So we know that this work is super important. Climate change is already impacting on WASH services. You already know this. You're already seeing the infrastructure damage and service disruptions. So it's essential that we have strong monitoring and clear monitoring driven by robust indicators to ensure that the policies, institutions and service providers are equipped to anticipate, respond and adapt to this deepening climate crisis. The indicators we're discussing today aim to capture resilience across the full WASH system, from policy and finance to user experience. So it's an opportunity to reflect on why this work matters and build momentum towards more robust and inclusive monitoring systems. And your engagement is key to shaping this moving forward. So we really want to in short, get your valuable thoughts. And with that, I'll hand over to you, Fiona. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Aidan. That was Aidan Cronin, Senior Advisor from the WASH team at UNICEF in New York. Let me just maybe go through a few housekeeping issues, but first of all, thank you to all of you for joining us for this webinar, wherever you are joining us from. We had a webinar this morning, and this is a repeat of the webinar we had for those of you that are in different time zones. So your microphones have been disabled, so you're unable to actually unmute yourself. So just warning you now that you will not be able to speak out if you wish to. But we do encourage you to use the chat function. And first of all, please do feel free to introduce yourself in the chat so we know who's with us today and who's joining us. And then please do keep your questions going throughout the presentation. We've got some exciting information to share with you. And please do keep the questions relevant to the topic of the webinar. If you are having technical issues and problems, please feel free to reach out in the chat. There's many of us monitoring the chat, and we will also be having a moment towards the end of the webinar to sort of compile some of the questions that have been raised and to go round and answer them. We are recording this webinar, just so you know. The webinar this morning was equally also recorded. These will be made available as alongside the PowerPoint presentations on the website. So just in case you're keen to have the slides, they will be made available very shortly on the website. We'll be providing the links to the website. Now, regarding interpretation, we do not have interpretation available. However, what you can do, depending on your Teams version, is actually, as you can see in this slide, activate subtitles in English. Some of you may have a sophisticated Teams function that may allow for subtitles to be translated into different languages. But what we do plan to do is when we post the webinars and online, we will be adding translations of the subtitles onto them. So I think with that, what I'd like to do, and I'm really pleased to see how many people are joining us. This is absolutely fantastic. So a warm welcome, those of you who have just joined. I'd like to introduce the team. If we can go to the next slide, please. So my name is Fiona Gore. I lead the GLAAS team at WHO. GLAAS is the UN Water Global Analysis and Assessment of Sanitation and Drinking Water. And we are here with the GLAAS team and the JMP team, JMP being the Joint Monitoring Programme on Water Supply, Sanitation and Hygiene. So as you can see here, you can see some nice portrait of all of us and the two teams. My colleagues Marina Takane, as well as Betsy Engebretsen, who are also involved in this climate resilient work and monitoring climate resilient WASH, as well as Janet Atim, who is the GLAAS focal point at UNICEF on the UNICEF side. And on the right-hand side, we have my colleague Rich Johnston, who leads on the WHO JMP side, and Tom Slaymaker, who leads on the UNICEF JMP side. So I think with that, I'm going to take this opportunity to welcome you all again and to pass over to Tom to say a few words about the process. Thank you. Tom?
Thank you very much, Fiona. So I'm going to briefly recap on the objectives and the process that we've been following. So obviously, climate resilient WASH services is relevant to both the GLAAS and the JMP teams. It covers both the inputs and the processes that have traditionally been monitored by GLAAS and the outputs and the outcomes that have traditionally been monitored by JMP. And so we're working together on this joint review, which has a very explicit focus on monitoring. And the objective was really then to identify the various different frameworks that are out there, the existing indicators, existing opportunities for data collection, and any data that have already been collected that describe the links between climate resilience and WASH. And to do that, we put together a consortium of research partners who will be introduced in a moment. That includes the University of Leeds, University of Bristol, University of Oxford, and the University of Technology in Sydney. And we also established this technical working group. So this is a group of around 20 people from a wide range of different countries and backgrounds and expertise, which covers both WASH and climate and data and monitoring. And their job is to provide inputs to the review, but also to review the outputs and to give feedback to the JMP and GLAAS. But the purpose here is always to bring it back to a discussion about identifying those areas where GLAAS and JMP could potentially focus our future monitoring efforts. Now, we're very committed to trying to make this a transparent process. There have been a whole series of opportunities to engage with stakeholders. As Aidan said, this is our fourth webinar that we've held so far, and we're using it to launch a public consultation on the emerging list, shortlist of candidate indicators. But our process is very focused on WASH. And of course, this is just one part of the conversation that's going on around adaptation and resilience. And in particular, we have the UNFCCC Global Goal in Adaptation, which has a work stream to develop indicators to monitor the GGA targets. And that includes target 9A, which covers water and sanitation. So you may know that the UNFCCC has produced a list of potential indicators for monitoring those targets, and that recommends drawing on the outputs from the JMP and GLAAS review. We're going to wait to see what comes out of the negotiations around how the GGA will be taken forward following negotiations at the upcoming COP30 in Brazil. Next slide, please. So just to look at the timeline, we engaged the academic consortium in March of 2024, and shortly after that, we constituted our technical working group. We had a kick-off meeting of that technical working group in July, and then we had the first set of public webinars introducing the project, but also a call for submissions to the review. And then from July through to the end of 2024, the research partners conducted a series of in-depth reviews, which Barbara will talk about in a moment, which included all of the things that were submitted following the public webinar. And then these findings were reviewed at the first of the technical working group meetings, which was in December last year. And then we shared those out through a second set of public webinars in February of this year. So we spent the next several months really reviewing the feedback that we had received on this long list of indicators that was put out for public consultation, and moving towards a shorter list. So working with the academic consortium, working with the technical working group, and trying to come up with a short list of indicators that can be taken forward for pilot testing. We had a third meeting of the technical working group in September to try to finalize this shortlist. And this is what we're going to be presenting to you here for this second period of public consultation. And just to let you know that we plan, following this consultation, to take into account all of the feedback that we receive, and then to start to pilot the shortlisted indicators with interested countries at the beginning of next year. And then to reconvene the technical working group to review lessons learned from those early pilot countries in late 2026 or early 2027. So as you can see, it's a highly iterative process and a consultative process, which is really designed to raise awareness, to build consensus among WASH sector stakeholders around a core set of priority indicators that can be used by JMP and GLAAS for global monitoring of climate resilient WASH in future. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Barbara, who's going to briefly describe what was done with the reviews and the conceptual framework. Barbara, over to you.
Thank you so much, Tom, and thank you to everybody who's attending this session. It's really fantastic to be able to share this work with you and know that we're going to get incredibly rich input from this pretty amazing group. I'm a bit stunned looking at the names coming up on the chat. It's really exciting. So one of the things that Tom mentioned is that we did an early call for resources from the sector, and we did an early, fairly broad review just to find out what people were thinking about resilience, climate resilience in WASH. And on the basis of that, we developed the conceptual framework for this work. If you go to the next slide, please, David. So the work of the academic consortium is obviously not just me. I'm the person you get to hear from at this seminar, but we have a very large team. They're shown here, and actually there are a lot of additional people who've contributed to the reviews. We've had a lot of second reviewers from amongst academic colleagues in our institutions and around the world who've really supported this very extensive review process that we've been through. Next slide, please. So what's the framing that we came up with to guide this whole process? I think a lot of people, when they think about climate resilient WASH, they think immediately of two things. One is the attributes of the infrastructure. So what kind of infrastructure should I build to achieve resilience? And what is the measure of a resilient service? So, you know, what's the acceptable level of downtime for a water supply system, for example? So that's often people's starting point. But we were really interested in expanding the universe of what drives resilience. So the first thing we included in our thinking, click, was the idea that service providers take actions which influence the type of infrastructure which is built and can influence the kind of service outcomes that we see. So this could be things like the way people plan infrastructure delivery and the way people engage with their customers. But these three things take place within the context of the water catchment, of course. So click, we needed to really think about how does the watershed influence the attributes of WASH infrastructure and the way that they deliver services. All of these things are obviously influenced by the broader policy, institutions, regulation and finance environment within which service providers and customers exist and within which the watershed is managed. Those policy, institutions, regulation and finance can also click influence the way in which the WASH sector interacts with the watershed. So the way in which the WASH sector coordinates its actions with water resources managers, but also with drainage and solid waste management, which are incredibly important, particularly for sanitation service delivery. So far, so good. This looks like the WASH sector, but there's a critical element missing. Click. Of course, we also wanted to bring into this picture the idea that the users of WASH services are themselves able to take actions which can contribute to being adaptable and resilient. So, for example, preparing for a flood event, stockpiling materials to ensure you've got access to hygiene. But that also reminds us, Click, that there's another important aspect of resilience, which is not just about service outcome, but it's about the way in which users experience their services during intense or slow onset weather events that are attributable to climate change. So this picture here really shows you the universe of climate resilience that we are considering in this project. Things to the left of this framework are what we might think of as inputs to resilience, and things at the right-hand end are the measures that we might think of as good measures for the outcome of having climate resilient WASH services. So this is, we're going to walk you through this framework a couple of times during this seminar. Keep this in mind. How did we populate the long list of candidate indicators? Well, we talked to all of you to get some inputs at the beginning, and then we did some very specific tasks. If you could go to the next slide, please, Dave. Oh, sorry, I always forget to say this slide. We also very explicitly talked about things which are outside the scope of this project. These are things which are very important and they do relate to climate resilience, but they are not things which the JMP or the GLAAS are specifically mandated or indeed best suited to measure. So, for example, the resilience of the wider governance system clearly matters. The resilience of water resources in general is obviously extremely important. So are transboundary water issues. So is the resilience of the solid waste and drainage system itself. But those things are, we see them as things which contribute to resilience within our sector. They're not the core focus of this work. Importantly, measurement of emissions also falls outside the scope of this activity, but we are using the IPCC's definition of climate resilient development, which urges us to think about making resilient interventions which contribute to optimized management of emissions. So you will see emissions appear in a couple of places in the framework, but they're not central. The next slide, please. Having pulled this framework together, we carried out some reviews. We carried out 3 systematic reviews looking for evidence or suggestions which have been made for adaptation actions or attributes of WASH systems which have been linked to climate resilient WASH outcomes. So things on the left of our framework which have been shown to be connected to things on the right-hand side of our framework. We did this for sanitation, we did it for hygiene, and we did it for WASH in general. We did 2 further reviews, one of which was a review of reviews or an umbrella review. Click, please. For water supply, there have been a lot of systematic reviews for water supply, so we didn't do a systematic review, we pooled those reviews. And a scoping review on how resilience has been conceptualised in the WASH sector, but very importantly also how it's been conceptualised in adjacent sectors such as the health sector, energy, and so on. Click. Out of all of this, we identified some objectives. So essentially the things you want to achieve at each point in that framework that I showed you, which are essentially things which are going to lead to or be an outcome of climate resilient WASH. So what are we trying to do? We want, for example, early warning systems to be in place. And for each of those, we were able to identify a list of candidate indicators. And initially we had more than 600 candidate indicators. Obviously that was a very long list. So we then went through a shrinking exercise, which Tom has already touched on. Next slide, please. Essentially, we worked to bring that list down through a process of iterative, as Tom said, iterative public consultations, technical working groups, and internal work by the group, essentially whittling that list down to what we are now sharing with you today, which is the indicator list 5.2. It has 107 indicators in total, but 44 of them are identified as priority candidate indicators, which we're proposing to further develop and pilot in the next phase of this programme. How we were doing this was to look at the usefulness of those indicators, but also examining the balance right across all the framework components, making sure we were addressing both rapid and slow onset events, making sure we were remembering to think about water supply, sanitation, and hygiene, and pulling in some of the important themes which are very integral to the work of the GLAAS and the JMP, notably, for example, equity. So this short list of 44 indicators is what we're about to share with you now. And I think on that basis, I get to hand over, I think, to Marina.
Super. Thanks so much, Barbara. So I will get us started on this process of going through the short list of indicators, starting with the indicators on the left-hand side of the conceptual framework. As you can see on the top right, this is the part that's circled in red. So the indicators related to policies, institutions, regulation, and finance, these sort of upstream adaptation actions by national and subnational government. So these are the enabling environment type indicators. That is basically sort of the scope of the monitoring that is done through GLAAS. Just a couple of notes on how we are presenting these indicators here, and in the next few slides, we have the indicator objectives on the left. These are sort of the broader objectives, whereas the candidate indicators themselves are on the right. And you'll note as well that each of the indicators has an ID number, which is encoded so that the first part of the ID number is indicating which component of the conceptual framework the indicator falls in. So in this case, for the policy indicator, since this is the first component in the framework, the indicator IDs all start with 1. And so you'll see these sort of incremented as we go through the indicators across the framework. We are aware that these indicators are not fully finalized and ready to go. They still require some refinement, terms that need to be clearly defined, and metadata would also need to be developed. But and that would be very much an objective of the next phase and closely linked to the country pilots. But emphasizing again that what we're looking for here is to come up with a reasonable set of candidate indicators in the shortlist that we can take forward for the country piloting, which also means that we can't have too many indicators on our shortlist. So as we go through the indicators, once again, encouraging you to put any questions that you may have in the chat, which hopefully we can respond to either in the chat, or we can also pick up in the Q&A session towards the end of this webinar. So let's get started. So the first indicator is on WASH sector policies and plans. And so this is a good example of what we've been calling a stacked indicator. So basically indicators with multiple levels. And so basically what we are planning to do, or the aim, is to condense these into a single index with several levels. And you'll see that there are quite a few indicators that are structured in this way in the shortlist. Next indicator 102 is on the use of risk-based management plans. So for example, water safety plans or sanitation safety plans that take into account current and future climate. And these, and you'll see as we go through that many of the PIRF indicators are linked to indicators further downstream in the framework. Next slide, please. The next two indicators are related to national climate resilience planning. So indicator 103 on national adaptation plans and indicator 106 on national mitigation plans. Noting that this indicator 106 is the only indicator on our shortlist linked to emissions. And so, recognizing the importance of emissions, even though the framework itself that we've been working through is very much more on adaptation rather than mitigation. But we were keen to include this indicator, recognizing that it is a very important element to consider. Next slide, please. So the fifth and last shortlisted indicator under the policy component is indicator 105 on equity. So ensuring that climate resilient WASH investments are focused on vulnerable populations and those disproportionately affected by climate change. I did want to give an indicator that was not shortlisted. So we have here indicator 104, which is not on the shortlist. This is about prioritizing domestic water use over other water uses. And, it's a promising indicator, but again, in this phase of the project, we are really trying to narrow down the list of indicators. And so retaining really only those indicators that we thought were most important, broadly applicable, and really essential to monitor for climate resilient WASH. Next slide, please. So moving on to the institutions component, we have a total of 3 indicators under this block. So this indicator 201 is on the use of climate data and seasonal forecasts. So looking at various aspects such as, are these data downscaled and accessible for use by WASH sector stakeholders? Are the data relevant for WASH service delivery? Are they reviewed and updated regularly, etc.? So again, this is one of these stacked indicators where we are looking to consolidate these into a single index. Next slide, please. The next 2 indicators under institutions are 202 on early warning systems, and then 203 on national WASH monitoring systems. Next slide, please. On regulation, we have 3 indicators. These are all looking at the existence of standards and regulations. So the first indicator, 301, on design and construction of resilient infrastructure, 302 on operations and maintenance, and then 303 on restoration of services. And again, these indicators are quite important in that they are sort of referenced further downstream in other indicators, in components further to the right in the framework. Next slide, please. And then finally, under finance, we have 2 indicators. So first, indicator 401 on budget allocation. So looking at how the budget allocation compares to the total annual costs identified for WASH climate adaptation. And then a second indicator, 403, on actual expenditure. As we know that not all budgeted funds are always fully utilized, we want to ensure that we are capturing both of these aspects. So this comes out to a total of 13 indicators under the PIRF components, these enabling environment indicators. And with that, I am going to hand back to Barbara for the indicators on adaptation actions. Back to you, Barbara.
Great, thanks so much, Marina. So now we're moving to the middle of the framework. And this is a sort of liminal zone, which lies somewhat in the GLAAS remit, but possibly sometimes in the JMP remit. Here, we're particularly interested in service provider actions. So the first set are about adaptation actions by hygiene promoters and supply chain actors. And here we're interested in whether households are supported when they try and take action to be resilient or to recover. And the indicator we've chosen here is the proportion of the population covered by a well-defined event-specific preparedness plan. So the question is, do hygiene and supply chain actors have event planning in place to know what to do when a crisis hits? The next set, also still around service providers, specifically now thinking about water supply and sanitation service providers. Here we see what you'll see commonly throughout the rest of the framework is a pair of matched indicators, one for water supply and one for sanitation. 602 is about risk management plans for water supply, for example, climate resilient water safety plans. And 702 is risk management planning in sanitation. These link back to the policy indicator 102 that we heard earlier. So does the policy mandate risk-based planning? And here we see the question, do service providers implement that policy? The next two in this space are also linked back to policy. So here we are interested to know whether service providers are implementing the national regulations and standards for operations and maintenance. So if the operations and maintenance national standards require certain levels of routine inspection, for example, is that being implemented as it relates to current and future climate events? So that links back to indicator 302 in the policy space. Okay, moving on. We have a set which are about coordinating with water resources management. I glanced at the chat and I saw a question about ecosystems management. Yes, we want to know whether there's coherence and cooperation between people working in the water resources space and people working in the WASH space, whoever those people might be. And the indicators here that we've chosen are whether or not water supply and sanitation and wastewater investment and management plans reference water resources management plans. So we want to know if those two things are connected together and being coordinated. And this is the indicator that we think is quite good for assessing whether that's happening. Similarly, we want to know whether the WASH sector is influencing water resources management. So the question is, how many people live in catchments where the water resources management plan specifically addresses climate risks to water supply and sanitation? So these are two indicators which face in opposite directions, but are essentially about understanding if there's a cogging together of catchment management and ecosystem management with the WASH sector. Going to the next slide, we have one additional indicator about coordination, which specifically asks a similar question to know whether investment in operational plans in water supply and sanitation are paying attention to what is going on in terms of investment and operation of drainage systems, because drainage is really integral, particularly to sanitation and particularly in any urban or urbanizing area, but pretty much everywhere, to be honest. Okay. We then have, next please, a set of indicators which are about the attributes of water resources, specifically as this relates to water supply and sanitation. The top two, 1301 and 1302, are about water quality. The one on the left is about whether raw water services which are used for drinking water are meeting design quality standards. So that's an indicator over time of whether water quality is being maintained, or if we're in a situation where raw water is, for example, becoming more saline because it's not being protected or because the appropriate sources are not being used. On the right is another water quality one, but this relates to the operation of sanitation systems and the question about whether sanitation systems are failing or being allowed to discharge into downstream water bodies when there isn't sufficient scope for dilution. And we were interested in water quality non-compliance downstream of sanitation systems. There's a linked indicator about water quantity, which is 1303, which was at the bottom of that list. So that's, again, about raw water services providing the required levels of service. Okay, next. We have some indicators about the attributes of indicator, again, paired indicators. Here are two paired indicators about the implementation of construction and design standards. So again, linking back to that policy indicator 301, are national standards on climate resilient design and construction being implemented on the ground for water supply and sanitation? And this reminds me to say that some of these indicators we've identified as being appropriate to ask about household services, but also schools and healthcare facilities. And you see those mentioned here. Going to the next pair, we also have a set of questions specifically about hygiene facilities, but here we are focusing explicitly on schools and healthcare facilities. So our national regulations and standards that take into account current and future climate being implemented to guarantee hand hygiene and menstrual hygiene in schools and healthcare facilities. Okay, so that's the behaviour of service providers and the nature of the infrastructure. And now we're moving right to the right-hand side of the framework, and we're going to look at service outcomes, which falls very much within the remit of the JMP. And I'm going to hand to Rick.
Thank you, Barbara. Can you hear me okay? Sound check?
Yeah.
Great. So we've proposed 8 candidate indicators in the service functioning component. And here you see the first 2, which are based on existing SDG indicators around safely managed drinking water and sanitation services, which do already go some ways towards being climate resilient. I think if you really have a well-managed system that delivers safely managed drinking water or sanitation, you're more likely to be climate resilient. But we wanted to make these specific to the challenges of climate resilience by adding in or layering on top of them the nationally determined climate hazard zones. So this does presume that countries have determined climate hazard zones, but again, that links back to some of the policy indicators like number 105 on identifying priority vulnerable populations. So for instance, what proportion of households have households that are living in flood-prone areas or drought-prone areas have safely managed drinking water services, and how does that compare to the proportion outside of those climate hazard zones? Now, there are some real technical challenges in doing this. Right now, most countries can't map safely managed services at a subnational level, but we think it's a reasonable ambition to set. Note also that this indicator could apply to populations, but also to schools and healthcare facilities where the basic service levels are already being monitored. And we consider this set of indicators as being good for monitoring slow onset events as well as rapid onset ones. And if you'll click to the next slide, Dave, you'll see that there's a corresponding one for hygiene about populations or schools or healthcare facilities that have basic hygiene services, so access to soap and water at a hand washing facility, again, within those nationally determined climate hazard zones. Next slide, please. Here, we're moving into a set of indicators around damage and disruption. So these first 2 are around damage, and these are related to indicators from the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. And by the way, that global framework includes 38 indicators, so the 44 that we're presenting are very much in the same league. And one of the Sendai indicators is about damage to critical infrastructure, including to schools and healthcare facilities, that is attributed to disasters. So we've taken that as a starting point and made them a bit more specific here to refer to domestic water supply and sanitation infrastructure. And we feel that these indicators would be very relevant to the whole discourse on loss and damage related to climate events. Next slide, please. Next, we have a set of indicators related to disruptions to services. And these are related to, but distinct from the damage indicators. And again, these echo Sendai indicators around disruptions to basic services attributed to disasters. You can see we have water and sanitation. We also have hygiene here, but we didn't propose one on the last slide about damage to infrastructure. And it's not that hygiene infrastructure can't be damaged due to climate events, but hygiene infrastructure tends to be located at the household or at the school or healthcare facility, whereas water and sanitation infrastructure includes larger engineered systems like treatment plants and distribution lines that are more salient perhaps for damage. You can also see here that we've talked about in the last Y. So we haven't specified a particular time period or recall period. Again, that's something that we would want to do, but as part of the indicator development in the next phase of work along with country pilot. Next slide, please. Now we're moving into the user experiences, where we also have 8 candidate indicators. And the first set, well, user experiences first, we should note that these really matter, and it's not just the service functioning that we need to consider. Service in the user experiences are a good composite, both of the extent to which services are maintained and the ability and confidence that households have in coping during a crisis. So this first pair here for water supply and sanitation relates again to disruption, but it's about the availability, the easy access to alternative water supply or sanitation facilities that meet minimum standards when there is that kind of period of disruption. So obviously those link very closely to the previous slide. Next slide, please. For hygiene, we have 2 indicators of user experience that are about the ease with which people can access critical hygiene materials for hand washing in 2205 and for menstrual hygiene management in 2203. And both of these we see as the type of indicators that would be routinely collected to establish a baseline. And then if there is a rapid onset event, kind of disaster, there could be a dedicated data collection around it to see what the impact of that climate event was on these hygiene ability to perform hygiene. I saw that Wendy Anderson was very happy to see these in comments, so we're also very happy to have your reflections. I thought you were preparing some detailed questions and comments. We'll see if we can get to those today, but please do send those in as part of the consultation, which we're going to hear about very shortly. Next slide, please. Now we have a pair of indicators about no, sorry, the one before, 2001 and 2101. Yes, these are about the experience of distress related to service disruptions. And these are built out from the work done over the past 10 years or so on water insecurity experiential scales, for the WISE scale. So for water, we're interested to know how many people feel worried about not having enough water to meet all of their household needs, or who feel unsafe at the sanitation locations that they use before, during, and after a climate event. And finally, on the last slide, we have a pair of indicators that are related to service providers or possibly regulators. These are about the number of complaints that are received from customers, that are analyzed, and that are acted on. And this is a paired set for water supply and sanitation services. So this is the type of information that could come relatively easily from regulators or service providers who often already collect data on user complaints. And if these were routinely collected, it would again be possible to do a special round of data collection after an extreme weather event, like a flood or something, to measure the impact of that event. All right, so on this next slide, we see a summary of the overall framework and how those 44 indicators are distributed across it. You can see that there are quite a few in the policy, institutions, regulation, and finance area, as Marina mentioned, but also a good number spread throughout the other components, with 8 each proposed for service outcomes and user experiences, and a smaller number for each of the components in the center. You will notice that we don't propose any shortlisted indicators for adaptation actions by users. And this is because we reviewed candidate indicators, but didn't find one that we thought was ready for development into global indicators. But we would really like to hear your feedback over the coming weeks about this draft shortlist, including about its distribution. So let me now hand over to Fiona to talk about this consultation process.
Thanks very much, Rick, and a huge thank you to Barbara, Marina, and Rick for taking us through the proposed list of potential indicators. So I'd also like to thank you all for all the questions that have been coming in and keeping us well busy. And we're going to take a few moments after I talk about the consultation to try and address some of these questions. So as mentioned, the JMP and the GLAAS teams are really pleased to launch a public consultation on the draft list of candidate indicators, and the link has been put in the chat. So we're seeking your review. We want to hear from you. You can contribute to this on this proposed list of candidate indicators, which, as mentioned, include 44 candidate indicators for development for global monitoring out of the 107 that Barbara mentioned. we want to know, is this set, do you feel it's too long? If so, what could be reduced? What should we be prioritising? Is anything missing? Any critical indicator that you feel is not there? And do you have any suggestions of how we could fill that gap? And I think we've already seen in the chat some of the questions coming in, so please keep those coming. And we also recognise that some of the detailed formulation of many of these candidate indicators, as Marina's already mentioned, will need definitions and will need improvement and metadata. So this would be also something that would come as one of the objectives in the next phase, and alongside the country piloting plan for 2026. So just the last point on this, we're really interested for that to ensure that the shortlist is a well-balanced set among the different framework components, the water, the sanitation, hygiene, but also rapid and slow onset events, and the various components of the framework that we've been presenting to you. So the idea is for this public consultation to run from today until the 30th of November. And we really, look forward to receiving your feedback. On the shortlist and any opportunities also for the pilot. So you can write to us at the email that is on the slide here, but there's also, we're putting a link to, if you wanted to fill out this survey, a Microsoft form, just providing us with your feedback. And please do so by the 30th of November, and we'll also be taking into account some of the information that and reflections you've shared with us today. So I think with that, we can maybe go to the next slide. And I think we're going to take, a few moments to sort of maybe try and answer some of your really, really good questions that have come through in the chat. And maybe I will turn to our colleagues, and I see, Barbara, you've already been answering some of these questions in the chat directly, so that's fantastic. And I think maybe, and I've been trying to follow these and make sure, but so tell me if you've already addressed these, but Brian Reed was asking about access to minimum service may be disrupted by other reasons. Such as lack of maintenance. Why is only climate being measured? How does this matter to the user why it failed? I don't know if maybe Barbara, you want to try and tackle that particular question?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question, Brian, and a fair one. And we've wrestled with this a little bit. Obviously, continuous service provision is the objective. So we are, as a matter of general course, JMP is interested in ongoing access to functional services. And so the extent to which you maintain that is a function of everything that you might do, good or bad maintenance, and also every contextual factor, the climate, other disruptions, civil unrest, whatever they might be. So we have a general picture of how that's happening. This particular exercise is to really explore the specific actions that you can take to protect wash systems from the particular effects that are related to climate change. So we have the service outcome indicators, which really look at these the extent to which services are maintained in areas which are being affected by climate change. And that enables us to link all the way back to those upstream activities that we may or may not be seeing happening in policy and regulation and adaptation actions by service providers, to be able to understand better and better over time which of those things are really important to ensure that we deliver climate resilient services within the context of climate changing. Your point's very well taken. And you could argue that climate resilience maybe doesn't matter, but that what we found when we were doing the review is that there is such limited understanding of what are the particular interventions that really drive climate resilience. This is going to give us a really clear understanding of those interconnections. But you'll notice, particularly in the service outcome indicators, we have some that are across the whole piece to look at the extent to which the whole system is responding to whatever the climate context is in a given place, and then some that are specifically disaggregating out areas which are affected by the climate, so we can understand more about that. It's a very good point, and we spent a lot of time considering indicators that are just indicators of very good WASH practice. A good one, for example, is leak reduction for networked water supplies, for utility water supplies. It's got a link to climate, but it is really just good practice in the WASH sector, so it's not included in this set. And it's not really an answer to your question, it's just an acknowledgement of that slightly awkward tension that you've really highlighted there.
Excellent, thank you, Barbara. And please do forgive me because we're not going to be able to address every single question that has been raised, but please do send these to us and we will be picking these up from the chat. I'd like to pick up on a couple more, one from Adam, and thank you for your positive feedback, Adam. We always appreciate positive feedback. To what degree are some or all of these indicators already being monitored by countries? And I think that's a really, really good question. And how do these align with climate-related donor KPIs? Another really good question. I'm not sure we're going to necessarily have answers to these, but I think we're definitely interested. And actually, the other point you're raising, and maybe Rick, you want to address this, it's about healthcare facilities. For countries interested in piloting and collecting data, specifically for healthcare facilities, how do you envision the use of WASHFit contributing, overlapping with data collection? I don't know, Rick, do you maybe want to say a couple of words about that?
Sure. So WASHFit is a WASH facility improvement tool for those who don't know, and it has a lot of detailed questions about WASH services and healthcare facilities, and it does include some around climate resilience. I think there's over 100 indicators in it. So I think that's a really good potential pathway to collect more data. And like all of these global tools, they're periodically updated and revised. So if something's not in it now, maybe next time it's revised, there could be a possibility there. The GLAAS questionnaire also is updated every time it circulates, every 3 years or so. So I think that's an example of a data collection system that's also relatively easy to update quickly. Household surveys, data that would come from populations, those take longer and they're less standardized. There are an awful lot of different types of household surveys implemented by different countries around the world. So it might take some time for new questions to diffuse or work their way into those. But some are already included. For instance, there are some indicators around menstrual hygiene management that are already in the mix. So if we could, have that as baseline, then we'd be in a good position to compare what the situation is after a climate event. But I also think we shouldn't pretend that all of this data is already being routinely collected. It's not, and it will take quite some time before data systems would internalize and refine and actually use these all to get to be able to compare the situation among multiple countries.
Thank you, Rick, for that response. I'd also like to, at this point, pick up on Wendy's comments and suggestions about can safe and locally affordable be added to the description of MH products or supplies to be made available. And I think that's a really good suggestion. And her second point, the current state of MH products access and education is poor. How do we measure against an already unacceptably low baseline? So some really, really good questions. Thanks for those, Wendy, and to keep us on our toes and to keep thinking. I don't know if there's any you want to react, because I see you laughing, Rick. Yes.
Well, I think we've actually tried to make sure that we don't put too many elements into a single indicator. So for instance, in the past, we've had global indicators about menstrual hygiene related to feeling safe and private and having a place to clean, and multiple elements within one indicator, and it complicates things. And then if you don't meet that indicator, you don't know, is it because of a lack of privacy or a lack of materials to wash? So what we've tried to do here is to have, as far as possible, clean individual elements. So the one around menstrual hygiene that we thought was most relevant to the climate stressors is about having sufficient materials to change. A data collection system that collected that could also collect other informations like what type of materials were they affordable, etc. But at least I don't think it would be best to bundle those all into the global indicator that we would aim to track.
Great, thank you, Rick. We've got a couple of minutes left. There was one question, I've just been scrolling through the chat to find it. It was about human resource capacity, and sorry, I can't recall who made that comment, but I think we definitely are looking at assessment of human resources and capacity. I don't know if Barbara or Marina, is that something that you'd like to maybe comment on?
So yeah, I mean, there is in the 5.2 list, but not in the indicators that we selected for priority further development. There is a specific indicator about human resource capacity to deliver climate resilient WASH. We liked it a lot, but in the end it didn't make the cut on the basis that we were having to choose between a lot of very good candidates. So, you know, please give your feedback in the consultation if there's a case to be made for dropping something else and popping that one in. I mean, I know that GLAAS currently asks questions about workforce capability related to needs in the sector. So it was one of the ones, you know, it's important, but it just didn't make the cut. I don't know what else to say, really.
No, and I think it's a really good point, Brian, and thanks for raising it. And so do make the case for it in your feedback.
Yeah.
I think that will be really useful. Okay, I think that there's one more question that maybe I'll turn to Tom and to the whole team. That was a comment from Gazi Newman, and thank you for your positive feedback as well. Do you consider aligning some of the final indicators with the climate finance guidelines for water and sanitation, for example, the GCF, to ensure better accessibility for climate finance by WASH projects in the future, and particularly sanitation? And I also turn to Tom again, because some of you may have joined after Tom was explaining the alignment that we are aligning with the global goal and adaptation indicators. So I thought it might be worth just coming back on that. Tom, over to you.
Yeah, so the GCF guidelines were part of the review, and the types of things that are included in the guidelines were considered when thinking about indicators, but we do not currently have sufficiently detailed indicators for measuring and monitoring climate resilient WASH. So they would be, you know, following the same objectives of the GCF guidelines, and they would be useful for measuring, monitoring progress against GCF objectives. But there were not a large number of indicators that could be directly extracted from those guidelines, because they're a very general level. But in principle, the idea is that we want to make sure that what the WASH sector and the WASH sector stakeholders are doing is well aligned with what the broader community working on climate adaptation and resilience is doing, both in terms of the terminology, the data sources, and also the mechanisms through which data are collected, analysed and reported at a national level, and eventually at a global level. So that is something which we are trying to ensure as we proceed with this process. We're also aware that many other sectors are going through similar processes of indicator development, and so there may well be opportunities to link with, build on, piggyback with other sectors that are looking at climate resilience. And to do that through some of the upcoming pilots. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much, Tom. We're coming up to time, so I think we'll go to the next slide, but just re-emphasizing that we will be sharing the slides and the recordings on the website. I noticed somebody has mentioned in French that the wasn't available. What we're planning to do is to add subtitles to the slides in at least 1 or 2 different languages. So really sorry about that. Pardon qu'il y a un manque d'interprétation, but we will be adding those to the slides online as subtitles. We'd like to thank our partners, our donors, and particularly to thank the whole teams and the JMP GLAAS teams, UNICEF, WHO, but also the University of Leeds, Oxford University, UTS, and University of Bristol. With that, please do come back to us with your feedback by the 30th of November. We are putting the link to the Microsoft form if you'd like to fill out the survey, or just send us an email with your reflections or points for today. Thank you for your great questions coming in today, for your reflections and comments. And I'm sorry we were not able to address all of them, but we will definitely be considering everything that has come up in today's webinars this morning, but also this afternoon. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us and for your interest and support. And thank you for contributing to this process. With that, I'm going to close today's webinar. And thank you all. And thank you to Dave behind the scenes, who's joined us from Asia and a long way away. It's really late for Dave. I'm so sorry. And we hope that you can get a good night's sleep. Thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of the day wherever you may be. Bye-bye.